Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Flint. I am so glad that all of you are joining us today. It's a beautiful day out, it's spring, and I'm so glad that you're here. My name is Chris Monk and I am going to be your worship associate today. If you are new to our congregation, let me tell you a little bit about us. We are an inclusive church. We welcome people regardless of your age, gender, sexuality, education, income, ability, or disability. We are inclusive. If you are searching for a church that believes love, the quest for justice, and the use of reason are the most important things, then our congregation might very possibly be right for you. If you'd like more information about UUism or our congregation, please feel free to contact one of our ministers or the church office at uuflint.org. Now I have some very important announcements. The first one, yay! Our guest speaker today is Amy Peterson Derrick. Oh my gosh, I miss her so much. It's been so long since she's been here. Amy has been a religious educator for 17 years, 10 of which were right here at UUCF. She's a lifelong UU, she's a mom, a nature lover, and a half-hearted vegetarian, living in St. Paul with her family and mischievous dog. She currently serves as Director of Religious Education at White Bear Unitarian Universalist Church in Minnesota, where she says the winters are cold, but the summers are perfection. Another announcement. We have a congregational meeting this Sunday after the service. It's to elect our GA delegates for this year. It's very important. It's going to take about 5 minutes, but it's very important that you get on Zoom for coffee hour after the service. The meeting ID code can be found on our website, Facebook page, or in the e-update. Please join the members of Flint's Woodchide Church on the courthouse lawn every Thursday from 1 to 2 and support the Black Lives Matter movement. It's especially important right now, I think, with the George Floyd trial going on. See your e-update for details or call Jerry. Our current Canvas committee would like you to know that our Canvas is well underway, and we're pleased with the number of you who have responded. You may not know that 53% of our annual budget comes from pledges. That is how it should be, too. We live into our mission of love, reason, and justice. Our hope is to have all pledge forms in by April 30th. If you have any questions, please contact Sandra Murphy or one of our ministers. Lastly, in September, we're going to be reimagining our church. We have continued to have services during the whole time of COVID, but we're going to try to start reimagining what it's going to look like when we all come back together and meet in the building again. So for more information, just keep your eyes and ears open as we get more information. Now, Jennifer, will you play us a prelude, please? We will now have our chalice lighting. We light this chalice, the symbol of our faith, knowing that this morning many others across the land and around the world are doing the same. For us and for our far-flung kin, it is a light of peace, of justice, and of love. But without work, these aspirations flicker out as soon as the candle is extinguished. Let us all join together to accept the challenge of doing the hard work that makes these aspirations real. Would you please join me in reciting our covenant? Recognizing the richness of diversity, the beauty and wonder of shared worship, and the transforming power of love and service, we gather as a sacred, intentional community to freely seek knowledge and truth, to celebrate the fullness of life, and by our actions to increase goodness and justice. Amy will now have for us a time for all ages.
Good morning. This morning's story is adapted from Leo Tolstoy's The Three Questions. Sam wanted more than anything to be a kind and loving friend. You could often find Sam laying on a grassy hillside or perched on the branch of a tree pondering just this. On one particular day, as Sam laid on a favorite hillside, the sun just warm enough to keep the cool spring breeze from feeling too cold, it occurred to Sam that if only they knew just the right time to begin everything, who was the most important person, and what was the most important thing to do, then Sam could indeed be a kind and loving friend. And so Sam decided to ask the people they loved the most to answer these three questions. When is the right time? Who is the most important one? And what is the most important thing to do? Sam's best friend said, to know the right time, one must make a plan and stick to it, no matter what. Sam's mom said that no one person could possibly know everything, so it was important to have a circle of wise friends. Sam's sibling said that there was no way to know what the most important thing to do is unless you can see into the future like a magician. But Sam wasn't so sure. Still wishing to find the right answers to these three questions, Sam decided to ask a wise teacher named Joy, who lived next door. The next day, Sam was delighted to find their neighbor outside working in the garden. Seeing Sam, Joy was delighted and greeted them with a warm smile and then turned back to her work. Sam was surprised to find that Joy seemed very tired and breathed heavily with each turn of the spade into the earth. Sam carefully approached Joy. "Excuse me," said Sam. "I can see that you are very busy, but I wondered if you might have time to help me with a few questions that I have been wondering about." Joy looked up from her work and smiled. "Of course, Sam. I would be so grateful for your help." And so Sam started digging and asked their questions. When is the right time? Who is the most important one? And what is the most important thing to do? Joy smiled, but before she could say anything, they heard a strange noise coming from the bushes. "Just a moment," said Joy. "Let us go and see what it is." As they crept closer, they found an injured rabbit tucked in behind the branches. "Well," said Joy, "it seems that this rabbit is in need of some extra care, and quickly. Sam, we will need a box and some towels to help me transport this poor thing to someone who can give it proper care. Do you think you can help me with that?" Sam nodded and quickly ran home and returned back with a shoebox lined with soft towels. Joy pulled on her gardening gloves and carefully scooped up the rabbit and placed it in the box. Sam helped Joy to her car and waved goodbye as Joy drove off, then sat down in the yard waiting for her to come back. It wasn't long before Joy returned and announced to Sam that the rabbit was in good hands and indeed was going to be okay. Sam was relieved, but still hadn't forgotten about those 3 questions. Joy, said Sam nervously, I wondered if now would be an okay time to talk about my questions. Joy sat down next to Sam and smiled and let out a soft chuckle. But Sam, you have already been answered. Sam was confused. How? What do you mean? Well, don't you see, said Joy, if you had not come to help me earlier, I would have had to dig those gardens all by myself when I was so very tired. So the most important time was when you were digging in the garden, and I was the most important one, and to help me was the most important thing. Then, when we heard the injured rabbit, it was the most important one, and what you did for the rabbit was your most important thing. Sam thought about this. So, replied Sam carefully, that means that now is the most important time, and whoever I am with is the most important one, and to do good is the most important thing? You got it, Sam, replied Joy. Just keep listening and paying attention to the world around you, and you will be just fine.
We would now like everyone to kind of go into a mood of meditation. I'd like you to breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. There is no easier way. I once saw a little sign carved in wood that read, "There is only the hard way." Many of us have been harmed by theology that told us that suffering was a sacrifice that would bring us closer to God. Many of us were told that our suffering would redeem us, even when we knew that actual redemption would have been to be free from suffering to begin with. Many of us are only here because of the sacrifices of others. So much of what is possible to carve out in this world requires some giving up, some letting go, some sacrifice. That is the truth of the little wooden sign. There is no easy way. There is only the hard way. In particular, the work of justice often asks us to do impossible, hard, terrifying things. There is no easier way. There is only this one hard way. Folks with more privilege sometimes get caught up here. If it's hard, maybe we are doing it wrong, we tell ourselves. We are lulled by our experiences of choosing between a hard choice and an easier one. Folks with less privilege know that many of our choices are between a horrific choice and a horrific choice. We learn to live with that and keep going. Many of us want to do the right thing, the just thing, the generous thing, and also to not have to give anything at all. We want to share our opinions, but not actually donate an evening, a weekend, or doing dishes while we are on a conference call to get understanding of the work that needs to be done and have meaningful thoughts. We want people to trust us and let us shape the vision, but not actually risk inviting folks out to tea, dinner, beers, or church to build a relationship that endures and carries us forward. We may want to post the cute Mimi without actually making the phone call to the city councilor or state representative. We want to be part of that powerful, courageous, game-changing, direct action without the long past midnight planning meetings, the messy decision-making, and the frayed relationships, and the constant wondering if it's all worth it. We want to talk about being bound together in interdependence, but do not actually want to give our guest room to a stranger, give a paycheck to someone we've never met, or turn our schedule inside out for what needs to be done. The word sacrifice might be too much mess for some of us, too tainted by oppression and coercion. What matters more is that we are willing to live our lives in the shape of what is being asked, not hope that what we are asked to do will fit into the shape of our lives. Amy would now present us a talk on Bless the Food.
Friends, good morning. It is so lovely to be here with you all, even though we are all states apart from one another. I'm so grateful for your invitation and for this technology that makes our gathering possible. I was asked to talk with you all this morning about my journey as a vegetarian, and it sounds like some of you are on a similar journey as well. And I promise you, I will get to that eventually. But first, I wanted to start with another story. One spring, several years ago, my family and I were on a hike in the woods in Northwest Wisconsin. It had rained pretty steadily in the days before, so as we walked, we worked to traverse not just the usual roots and rocks, but also sloppy, soppy mud and lots of puddles. We had been hiking for quite some time before we heard it, a loud crunch under our feet. We all stopped, frozen in our tracks, and looked a little closer to the ground down below our feet, only to discover that the path was dotted with more snails than we could count. We looked behind us, and sure enough, the snails had been there all along. We just had been lucky enough to miss them until that point in our journey. I had been so occupied trying to keep my shoes dry and my young children and dog out of the mud that I completely missed the impact that our hike was having on the clearly active snail population of Northwest Wisconsin. We continued forward, knowing that to turn back would have no less impact, but this time we walked a little more carefully, on our tiptoes with a closer eye to the ground, trying desperately to avoid more crunching, apologizing earnestly with each step we took. The longer I walked, the more I thought about how my very being and the existence of my family was forever altering all of existence, whether we meant to or not. How many other out-of-sight creatures and beings, I wondered, were we really touching by simply taking a morning hike in the woods? It seemed impossible to know, impossible to imagine. And for someone like me, and perhaps also for someone like you, people who like to know things, who like to believe that what we are doing is our best and that we're not leaving a trail of destruction in our wake, this feeling of not knowing can be a hard feeling to hold. Even when we are doing the hard, disciplined work, even when we are stepping lightly, sometimes we cannot know the depth of the impact of our existence. And so we do our best to pay attention, to stay curious, to try to learn, and then to alter our path when we learn better. So we went on eventually, and with each tiptoed step, I began to say a silent prayer, a prayer of gratitude, of awe and wonder, a little bit of sadness even, a prayer for the ground that held me, for the creatures visible and invisible that lined the path, for the earth and creatures that sustain my life and the lives of those I love. A prayer that my existence somehow blesses the world around me in the same way that I know I am blessed by the towering trees and the mossy rocks and the ferns and the trillium that were just beginning to peek through the spring soil. And I know that that language, the language of prayer, can be a little bit loaded for some of us. But what I mean by prayer is a very specific spiritual posture, I assume, when I've allowed myself to be deeply humbled by the grandness and mystery of that which is larger than all of us. It is a posture I try to remember when I am utterly lost in my not knowing, or when I am in the presence of unimaginable beauty, or sometimes even unimaginable loss. I try to remember this posture of prayer and reverence instead of what tends to come a little more naturally to me in those moments when I tend to cling desperately to what I think I can know and what I think I can control, sometimes layered together with anger and anxiety and a little bit of judginess, a need to do something, anything to solve the problem, to bring me safely away from that discomfort. Maybe you've experienced some of that too. Prayer for me helps to bring me instead back into my heart, back into my body, reconnected to existence, right dab smack into the muck of my discomfort. For me, this prayerful posture is the necessary first step to right action. It isn't a sweeping under the rug of the things that are too tough to face, but instead a practice of listening deeply to what is within and beyond. And it is a practice of naming, even when, and especially when, it is hard, so that I can then move forward with intention and humility. It connects me to awe, wonder, hope, and gives me a strong dose of humility, so that something inside me can be shifted. And maybe you have also felt some of those feelings of awe and wonder, so much so that it's moved you so deeply that your way of being was forever shifted. I imagine that it was those feelings of deep connectedness or awe or wonder that led Sam in our story to want to be a kind and loving friend, to want to ask those 3 questions. And so I'm going to invite you for a moment to join me in this space of awe and wonder. Maybe we'll join Sam as well. Let's take a breath. And close your eyes if you're comfortable. And feel your body relax. And allow yourself to imagine what it feels like to experience awe and wonder. What does it feel like in your mind? What does it feel like in your heart? What does it feel like in your body? Take a breath. Imagine where it was that you experienced this deep, humbling awe and wonder. Maybe you felt it when you were on a walk in the woods and the trees were just so large and so old. Or when you looked up at the stars at night and remembered that you were actually looking back in time. Or maybe you felt it when in the midst of great loss, people still thought to care for one another in big and small ways. Or maybe like Sam, you felt it while laying on your favorite grassy hillside. Or maybe you found it in those moments when you cooked a meal together with loved ones, breaking bread as we did in the before times. And as you broke the bread, maybe you imagined the hands that harvested the wheat, that milled the flour, that baked the bread. Or maybe as you shared that meal, you imagined how the green sustains you, becomes you, and the creatures and human hands that have made it possible. To be reminded of our connections to these things that are so large and so grand, such a blessing. Take a breath. I believe that taking the time to name and notice these things can help us move through the world more prayerfully or more intentionally, if that language works better for you. I like thinking about each step I take as being a sort of a prayer. When I'm wide awake and at my best, when I actually remember to pay attention and be a little less rigid in my thinking, I can loosen my grip a little. I can step a little more lightly, intentionally, and reverently. I can notice the blessings and interconnections and even notice the impact of my own existence and then name it. Then, and only then, can I take the next careful step. When we miss this first step, this spiritual work, not just in our work for ethical eating, but in our justice work, we then tend to approach injustice from a place of problem solving and agendas and perfectionism and centering our own comfort. Without reverence and humility, we might be a little too caught up in keeping our shoes dry, avoiding discomfort, that we forget to first take a closer look to the ground and listen, really listen to what is actually required of us. When we move full speed ahead without reverence, without noticing, without curiosity and humility, we might just forget to ask the right questions. And the trick of it is that when we are really listening, the answers to the questions are always changing, aren't they? Because as Unitarian Universalists, we know that revelation is continuous, that we are always learning. Which is why, if I am totally honest, I am often reluctant to talk about my thoughts about eating meat. I think it would be super neat and tidy to just call myself a vegetarian and say I've done the work, all the work I need to do around ethical eating, and just be done with it. Be done with curiosity and wonder and listening and humility, and replace it with comfortably resting on my laurels. But the truth is, when I listen, when I really listen, when I slow down, I know that eating ethically, mindfully, prayerfully is about so much more than the question of to eat meat or not to eat meat. Mindful, prayerful, ethical eating for me is also about recognizing that my access to food choices is undeniably connected to my privilege. It is about knowing that what I choose may not be right or even possible for others, and sometimes not even right or possible for myself. That there might be times when eating meat might be the best or only option. It is about working more on reducing food waste, working more to increase food and clean water access in way too many communities in our country, learning more about my food and how to eat locally and in season, learning more about workers' rights for those who do the hard work of harvesting food. And the list goes on and on to include so much more than I could ever know or imagine. And that doesn't mean I need to stop forever in my tracks. But what it does mean is that I can move forward a little more intentionally and prayerfully, listening closely to what I'm being called to do next, and do my very best to honor my covenants. We should hold these questions around ethical eating tenderly, with wide open hands, with curiosity and wonder, knowing that we are also holding multiple values right alongside them at the very same time. And we have to really listen and pay attention to those too. We need to also tend to our bodies, our spirits, our communities. As Unitarian Universalists, we must hold these questions with wide open hands because we are bound together, you and I, and all of existence. We are in covenant with one another, and none of us can hold these questions in a vacuum all by ourselves. We need one another to remind each other to listen, to help one another practice moving forward more prayerfully, to help one another, to hold one another up when it feels too impossible to choose the hard thing, and to help ease the load on those who only have horrific choices in front of them. This is hard work. And that is the truth of that little sign, writes Reverend Elizabeth Wynn. There is no easy way. There is only the hard way. And that is the work of our faith. We need each other. So for those of you doing this work around ethical eating, or any work for that matter, may you find open-hearted, joyful companions to hold this work with you. May you hold the work tenderly with wide open hands and wide open hearts, open to the mystery, open to the questions, and open to the imperfection of the work, but always together. May it be so. I offer these words from Gordon B. McKeeman as a blessing for your journey. How does one address a mystery? Cautiously. Let us go cautiously to the end of our certainty, to the boundary of all we know, the rim of uncertainty, to the perimeter of the unknown which surrounds us. Reverently, let us go with a sense of awe, a feeling of approaching the powerful holy, whose lightning flashes the sky, whose persistence splits concrete with green sprout, whose miracles are present in every place and moment. Hopefully, out of our need for wholeness in our own lives, the reconciliation of mind and heart, the conjunction of reason and passion, the intersection of the timeless with time, quietly, for no words will explain the inarticulate or summon the presence that is always present, even in our absence. So what shall I say? Anything. Any anger, any hope, any fear, any joy, any requests, any word that comes from the depth of being addressed to being itself, or perhaps nothing. No complaints, no requests, no entreaty, no thanksgiving, no praise, no blame, no pretense of knowing or of not knowing. Simply be the intimate presence of mystery, unashamed, unadorned, unafraid. And at the end of the day, say, Amen and Amen.
Our time for generosity. Thank you for the many ways you support UUCF as we promote our UU values in this community. Your generous offering makes our life-affirming and justice-centered message possible. You can make an offering at uuflint.org or send a check to the church office. This is the Second Sunday collection. UUCF collected $732 for Shelter of Flint last month. Thank you. Our Second Sunday donation this month goes to the Food Bank of Eastern Michigan. This agency serves over 333,000 people in 22 counties. They partner with more than 700 local agencies and churches to provide over 50 billion pounds of food. This amount is significantly higher than previous years. Please donate via check or website to UUCF with FBEM, Facebook, Food Bank of Eastern Michigan in the memo line. UUCF bundles our individual gifts and mails it with a letter of support. Our closing words. Field at the table. When I begin to bless this food and close my eyes, I lose myself just first in green. how do leaves grow themselves this green? And how do they grow at all to be so large? And how do they make themselves from soil, which is in itself is only brown, and sunlight helps and water, but how in the end is this green? How can I bless this food? It blesses me. Thank you, I say, for this bowl, which also is field, the green which is meal before I eat. Thank you, I say, that this green becomes me. Thank you for mysteries, this life. We will now extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.